In an upscale eatery in New York, a wealthy magnate orchestrates his empire with calculated exactness. However, his meticulously structured existence begins to unravel as he observes a homeless black boy peddling cookies on the sidewalk, the boy's dignity remaining intact despite the dismissals he faces. Intrigued, he extends an invitation to the boy and his mother for dinner, oblivious to the fact that this seemingly innocuous gesture will bring to light a history he believed was firmly laid to rest. As the woman crosses the threshold, her expression freezes, a chill enveloping her. She is the one who once transformed his existence. The shimmering city lights of New York danced through the towering glass windows of Harrison's prime, enveloping the elegant dining room in a warm, golden glow. It was an establishment designed for the elite, the influential, those who anticipated nothing short of excellence. William Will Harrison, the owner and a self-made millionaire, walked across the floor with an air of effortless confidence, embodying the essence of a man who held dominion over his realm. He wore a navy blue suit, with every detail flawless, from the crisp white pocket square to the gleaming leather shoes. Success wasn't merely an accomplishment. It was a part of him, an intrinsic quality he embodied. As he scanned the dining hall, his keen blue eyes darted over the guests, offering a subtle nod to a handful of recognizable faces. Backers, chief executive officers, established wealth emerges. They dined beneath shimmering chandeliers, savoring fine wine, immersing themselves in a realm where hardship was a distant reality for others. Will had battled fiercely to reach this point, to establish his dominion, and he held no tolerance for those who had not put in the same effort. A swift motion beyond the restaurant's glass doors drew his gaze. A young boy, perhaps 11 or 12, stood on the sidewalk, holding a small, worn box tightly against his chest. His attire was tattered, his footwear on the verge of falling apart, yet he stood tall, his stance unwavering. He wasn't pleading. He was peddling. Amidst the lively chatter and the delicate sound of China meeting, Will struggled to catch the boy's soft voice as he moved among the crowd, presenting items from his box. Many chose to overlook him completely, while others dismissed him with expressions of disdain. In that instant, Samuel Whitmore, the chief of security for the restaurant, advanced, his stance rigid and professional, yet tinged with a clear hint of contempt. He was a big, broad-shouldered figure, a former officer with the classic tough, straightforward attitude of someone who viewed certain individuals as challenges to be dealt with, rather than people to be comprehended. He meticulously adjusted the gold cufflinks on his sleeves, a final touch of elegance, before he opened the door. His voice was sharp and clipped. "Hey, keep it moving, kid. This spot is not for standing. This isn't the sort of environment that suits you." The boy recoiled slightly but stood his ground. His deep-set eyes met Whitmore's gaze, unwavering and bold. "I'm not pleading. I am offering for sale." His voice was steady and resolute, the sort that emanated from a person who had long embraced the unfairness of life yet remained unyielding in spirit. Whitmore let out a derisive laugh. "What are we selling? Poor choices. Visions of well-being." He advanced, completely obstructing the doorway looming over the boy. "I've instructed you to proceed." Will observed the scene as it unfolded, a sensation of constriction forming in his chest. He had witnessed this scenario unfold previously. A particular kind of individual invariably drew a specific kind of reaction. He had toiled relentlessly, pouring in countless hours, to feign anything different. His past lay hidden beneath layers of affluence and authority. Yet in that moment, something emerged, something unrefined. He was not fond of it. He lacked sentimentality. He refrained from engaging in charitable acts. Before he could reconsider, he found himself already striding toward the entrance. "That's sufficient, Sam." Will's voice flowed effortlessly, commanding and decisive, slicing through the tension like a seasoned leader accustomed to being followed. Whitmore paused, looking at him with a hint of surprise. "Excuse me, but this child is causing a disruption for the guests. It begins with just one, and before you know it, there's an entire shelter right outside." Will's stare was icy. "Did I request a discourse on urban sociology, or did I explicitly instruct you to cease?" A subtle change enveloped the space between them. Whitmore tightened his jaw, yet he stepped back cautiously. Even individuals like him understood when they had overstepped boundaries with the wrong person. Will focused his gaze on the boy. He appeared lean from a close vantage point, his hands clutching the box with a firm grip, as though he feared it might be taken from him. His face bore the freshness of youth, yet it was etched with a resilience that could only arise from enduring trials that no child ought to face. "Are you offering something for sale?" Will inquired, his tone enigmatic. The young lad nodded with a hint of hesitation. "Freshly baked cookies from scratch. They are made by my mom. She's unwell, so I assist." His voice held no plea, nor was there any hint of sympathy. Merely an assertion of reality. Will cast a quick look at the box before turning his gaze to the child's expression. He glimpsed something in that moment, a reflection of his former self, from a time long past. He let out a breath through his nose, a mix of amusement and irritation at himself for even considering this. "What do you think about making a trade?" The young lad scowled. "I prefer to earn my own way." Will nearly chuckled. "Naturally, that's not the case." He stated it was not a handout. "An agreement. Tomorrow you will bring your mom here. I'll treat you both to a meal. In return, you deliver a new supply of whatever it is you're offering." The boy paused, his fingers drumming lightly on the side of the box, deep in thought, curious yet wary. "I'm not sure," he confessed. Individuals often do not convey their true intentions through their words. Will wore a sly grin. "I stand apart from the crowd." A moment of stillness. In that moment, the boy gave a gradual nod. Understood. Will retrieved his wallet, extracted a $100 bill, and smoothly placed it into the box. The boy's eyes grew a touch wider. "As for the cookies," Will stated plainly, "and I anticipate they will be delightful." The child blinked, then offered a brief, elusive smirk before firmly clutching the box. "They shall be." In silence, he pivoted and strode off, vanishing into the shadowy avenues. Will let out a breath, a subtle shake of his head, as he turned back toward the restaurant. As he entered, Whitmore observed him intently, his expression inscrutable yet his gaze piercing with an unvoiced intensity. "I can't believe you're losing your edge, sir," Whitmore whispered to himself. Will cast a sidelong look at him, his demeanor unfazed. "No, just feeling a bit uninspired." As he strolled through the dining room, the gleaming chandeliers mirrored the flawless world he had crafted. Yet an unsettling sensation lingered, as if he had welcomed something incomplete back into his existence. The following evening, Harrison's Prime buzzed with its characteristic elegance, as waiters glided through the space with synchronized precision. Glasses chimed with refined grace, while the aroma of dry-aged steak and truffle-infused pasta wafted through the atmosphere. William Harrison lingered by the bar, nonchalantly swirling a glass of scotch, yet his gaze drifted to distant thoughts. He wasn't anticipating the arrival of someone deemed significant, at least not according to the norms of society. He reassured himself it was trivial, that the events of the previous night were merely a fleeting whim of curiosity. Yet curiosity had a frustrating tendency to evolve into something deeper. Suddenly, the door swung open. The boy entered first, his stance rigid, cautious. Caleb Reed wore the same tattered clothes, yet his hands were devoid of any burden. No box, no cookies, only a subtle tension lingering in his shoulders. Behind him, a woman trailed, her steps measured and tentative, as though she were an outsider in this space. And in this realm she did not. Evelyn Reed. Will's fingers gripped his glass with increasing intensity. The name rang a bell. Caleb had mentioned it just yesterday. Yet, seeing her stirred an unexpected tightness in his chest. She had more years behind her. Indeed, her features bore the marks of fatigue. Yet there was an undeniable grace in her demeanor, poised and resolute, reminiscent of a person who had endured countless unseen struggles. Her dark brown eyes surveyed the restaurant with a subtle caution, a reflection of someone who had faced rejection far too often. She was completely unaware of his identity. For a fleeting moment, Will contemplated turning on his heel, summoning a waiter to manage the situation, allowing this to stay as it was meant to be. an inconsequential blip in his otherwise carefully orchestrated existence. Instead, he placed his drink down and walked toward them, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. "You came," he said simply, observing Caleb as he squared his shoulders, resembling a bodyguard positioned protectively between him and his mother. The boy confessed, a hint of doubt lacing his tone. "I speak only what I truly feel," Will replied, then turned his attention to Evelyn. She observed him intently, her face a mask of mystery. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice gentler than he anticipated, courteous yet detached, as if preparing for an unwelcome moment. "She fails to see who I am." "Excellent." Text, he gestured towards a table at the rear, a more secluded spot than the rest, distanced from the quiet murmurs of the patrons who had begun to take note of them. He sensed it, the change in atmosphere, the glances, the unspoken scrutiny. A woman of her caliber in an environment such as this. Whispers would circulate, filled with conjecture. Some of them, undoubtedly, came from those who insisted they held no racist views yet still believed that certain places were not intended for specific individuals. Whitmore stood at his post by the entrance, arms crossed, his gaze lingering a moment too long, poised for an opportunity to act. Will turned a blind eye to him. They settled into their seats, and in mere moments, a waiter approached, yet Will noticed the subtle hesitation in his demeanor, courteous, yet strained. He lowered the threat, then glanced at Will, as if seeking approval to proceed. "Whatever they desire," Will stated with a lack of emotion. Caleb paused, glancing at his mother. Evelyn let out a gentle breath, setting the menu down with a delicate motion. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for your kind offer, but I want to ensure I'm not imposing on your generosity. It's not about being generous. It's a transaction that Will amended, observing her furrowed brows. Your son fulfilled his part of the agreement. I raised my own." A moment of stillness. Then, gradually, she inclined her head in agreement. Caleb, filled with newfound confidence, perused the menu, his eyes growing wider at the array of choices. He likely had never encountered many of the dishes on the menu, nor could he have fathomed that food could be so expensive. Will sensed that his hesitation stemmed not from doubt, but from a deep-seated instinct to be cautious. The kind that emerges from the experience of having to carefully manage your meals, a deep understanding that indulgence comes at a cost. "You don't need to pick the least expensive option," Will remarked, and Caleb's eyes darted to him, evaluating. "I wasn't going to," the boy retorted, and for the first time Will wore a smirk. "The order has been successfully placed." The server departed. A hush enveloped the surroundings. Will reclined in his chair, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table. Thus, "Your son mentioned that you bake cookies." Evelyn blinked at him, visibly startled by the abrupt change. "Indeed," she replied after a brief pause. "Are they any good?" "The best," Caleb declared before she had the chance to respond, his tone brimming with conviction. Will raised an eyebrow. "Indeed it is." Evelyn let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head slightly. "I would like to believe that. It was an activity I engaged in frequently prior to Will's arrival. Prior to the shift. Prior to the shift." Will might have inquired about her meaning, might have delved into the fragments of her tale that remained unspoken. Yet he was already aware. He understood all too well the feeling of having the ground yanked away, of losing the fragile stability he had managed to hold on to. He had experienced it firsthand. What transpired, he inquired instead, more to himself than anything else. Evelyn paused, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Then, gradually, she let out a deep breath. "My husband has passed away, placed us in a predicament from which we couldn't escape. It has been a continuous series of events since that time, and no one came to assist." She smiled, though it lacked genuine joy. "Individuals in our situation rarely receive assistance, Mr. Harrison. We are merely endured, if fortune smiles upon us." The way she articulated it resonated profoundly within Will, a heavy burden pressing against a part of him he had long buried. Before he had the chance to reply, the waiter reappeared with their dishes, placing them down with a meticulousness that seemed more contrived than normal. "Will hardly be noticed." He observed Kayla as she grasped his fork, hesitantly taking a bite, then another, his defenses softening for the first time since entering the restaurant. "This is truly impressive," the boy confessed, as though it caused him genuine discomfort to utter a compliment. Will wore a sly grin. "It wouldn't be the best if it weren't." Evelyn, nonetheless, continued to observe him intently. In that fleeting moment, he yearned for a glimmer of acknowledgement, for something tantalizingly close yet just beyond his grasp. She remained unaware for the time being. Yet, a flicker of recollection began to stir within her. Will exhaled slowly, compelling himself to divert his gaze, concentrating instead on the drink in his hand, on the dance of amber liquid reflecting the light. By tomorrow they would have departed. By tomorrow this will be insignificant. Tomorrow he might erase her from his memory entirely. Yet, an instinct deep within him whispered that it was untrue. The meal progressed, the atmosphere evolving into a more relaxed state, yet still tinged with an undercurrent of tension. Evelyn dined with precision, her posture elegantly upright, her actions measured, as though she anticipated the instant someone would point out her unworthiness in this place. Caleb, however, had settled into the experience, relishing each bite in a manner that conveyed to Will this wasn't merely a good meal. It was an exceptional one. He noticed how the boy looked at his mother between bites, ensuring she was eating as well, as if it were instinctive for him to prioritize her needs. Will was intimately familiar with that instinct. He swirled his drink, maintaining an inscrutable expression, yet within him, a tempest stirred. He reassured himself that it was insignificant, that this dinner was precisely what it was intended to be. A fleeting gesture, a commitment completed, and nothing beyond that. As he observed Evelyn gently push a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the soft glow illuminating her weary eyes, a recollection surged forth from the depths of his memory, one he had long concealed beneath layers of achievement and meticulously maintained separation. The night was frigid. An inexpensive, cramped kitchen filled to the brim. The aroma of freshly baked bread, a comforting contrast to the chill of winter air. A woman, only slightly older than Evelyn, was now presenting him with a plate of food, her smile soft and serene. Consume, she had instructed. Everyone deserves the strength to face the world, not hindered by hunger. He was a different man back then, toughened, wary, believing that everything had its cost. Yet, she had not requested anything. His fingers gripped the glass firmly. The woman in question was Evelyn. The understanding sank into him, heavy and unyielding, pressing against his ribs, tightening something deep within his throat. She had rescued him once. She had offered him a meal when he was much like Caleb, angry, hungry, and reluctant to trust anyone who professed kindness. She was the only one who had ever looked at him and recognized something beyond a lost cause. Unbeknownst to her, Will's fingers slipped from the glass as he compelled himself to breathe out, striving to soften the contours of his face before either of them caught on to the seismic shift that had just occurred within him. He had dedicated years to shaping a life free from obligations, where no fragment of his history could reach him. Yet now, as he sat opposite the woman who had unwittingly guided him to this moment, the past was not merely brushing against him. It was boldly confronting him. He spoke, his tone steady and deliberate. What transpired with the bakery? Evelyn glanced upward, momentarily surprised by the inquiry. She paused for a moment, then gave a faint, weary smile. You conducted your investigation into our background. I don't make deals without knowing who I'm dealing with, he replied smoothly, despite the fact that it was a lie. He had not examined them in the slightest. There was no necessity for him to do so. She placed her fork down with intention, her fingers gliding along the edge of her water glass. It was never truly my own, at least not in an official sense. I spent my time there, accumulated savings, and envisioned the possibility of taking the reins someday. Yet, when my husband left this world, everything fell apart more swiftly than I could manage to keep it intact. Obligations, healthcare expenses, the sort of matters that don't pause for your recovery. Her voice stayed steady. Yet, beneath it all, there lingered a weighty presence. I made an effort. Yet, effort can feel futile when the universe has already determined your defeat. Will's jaw tightened. He was deeply familiar with that truth. And no one came to assist. Evelyn let out a dry, humorless chuckle that slipped from her lips. Assistance often arises from a desire for self-image enhancement, the type of support that unfolds in front of cameras, with journalists poised to capture the touching scene. But genuine assistance? No, not for individuals like myself. Individuals appreciate my presence. He caught the nuance in her words, the gravity they carried. She had been waging wars long before she experienced the loss of her husband. Battles ceased for Will the moment he found himself no longer on the losing side. The atmosphere was thickening now. It had transformed beyond the simple act of dining. Caleb, unaware of the subtle tension building in the air, placed his fork aside and met Will's gaze head-on. Therefore, what is it that you actually do? Well, apart from instructing others on what to prepare, Will let out a brief chuckle, feeling thankful for the change. I manage several dining establishments. Similar to this, Will confirmed, just like this one. Caleb inclined his head thoughtfully. So, what makes you appear as if you'd prefer to be anywhere but here? Evelyn released a soft gasp. Caleb, yet Will merely smirked. You certainly don't shy away, do you? Caleb merely shrugged, showing no remorse. Just putting it out there. Your words don't convey the passion one would expect from someone truly engaged in their craft. Will swirled his drink, deep in thought. He might sidestep the question, offering a well-crafted response about the excitement of achievement, the joy of constructing a legacy. Yet that would not be the truth. He confessed that he takes pleasure in victory. That will suffice. Caleb furrowed his brow but chose not to pursue the matter further. Evelyn, however, continued to observe him intently, her expression a mystery, and then it appeared. A glimmer, a transition. She caught a glimpse of something. It wasn't complete acknowledgement, not at this moment, but he noticed the subtle way her brows knitted together, the slight narrowing of her eyes. It felt as if a faint echo from the depths of her mind was urging her to peer a bit deeper. Will compelled himself to maintain her gaze, refusing to waver beneath its intensity. Have we crossed paths previously? Evelyn inquired abruptly. The inquiry struck him with an intensity that seemed disproportionate. He might choose to deceive. It would be simple. A straightforward, I don't think so, would suffice, allowing the conversation to progress while remaining precisely where it needed to be on the surface. Yet the moment lingered between them, thick with anticipation. For the first time in years, Will found himself hesitating. The response lingered just at the edge of his lips, a revelation poised for utterance. Indeed, we have. You provided sustenance when I was in need. You were the sole individual who ever regarded me as valuable before I had the chance to demonstrate it. Yet he had transformed beyond that boy, and she was better off not knowing. He smirked, reclining in his chair with a casual confidence, the facade sliding seamlessly back into position. I questioned. I believe someone like you would definitely stick in my memory. Evelyn observed him for a brief moment more, and then, at last, she released it. As she redirected her focus to Caleb, engaging in a conversation that he barely absorbed, Will's fingers danced gently against the rim of his glass. Now, the question was no longer if she recalled him. The inquiry revolved around his desire for her to do so. The night grew darker, the soft hum of dialogue in Harrison's prime receding into the shadows as an unvoiced tension enveloped the table. Evelyn observed him, no longer with the polite detachment of earlier, but with a quiet, persistent curiosity, as if she were slowly assembling a complex puzzle. He sensed it, the gradual disintegration, the change in her demeanor with each word he uttered. She was unaware, not entirely, yet the suspicion lingered, quietly bubbling just below the surface. And that was perilous. Will had devoted years to concealing the past under layers of achievement, authority, and a meticulously maintained separation from the boy he once was. He had crafted a realm where he was beholden to no one, a place untouched by the shadows of his past. Yet here was the individual who had previously offered him kindness without any expectation of recompense, now seated directly opposite him. And she was starting to recall. "You seem like a person who prefers to keep their mysteries intact." Evelyn's voice carried a gentle strength, slicing through his thoughts effortlessly. Will raised an eyebrow, pretending to find it amusing. "So what precisely do you believe you're uncovering?" She paused, her fingers gliding along the stem of her water glass. "I'm not sure at this moment," she confessed. "Yet there's an essence about you that resonates with me." "No." The word wrapped around him, too intimate, too perilous. He managed a smirk, reclining in his chair, angling his glass ever so slightly. "Redirection. Mastery. Maintain control of the situation according to his rules. I would appreciate that as a compliment, were it not for the suspicion I sense behind your words." Evelyn shook her head, a soft chuckle slipping from her lips. Yet, in her gaze, there was a piercing intensity, a force that sliced through his meticulously built walls of indifference. "This is merely a reflection, not a charge." Caleb, with the remnants of his meal lingering on his palate, cast a glance between them, sensing an unvoiced tension that eluded his full comprehension. That was quite enjoyable. Will required the boy to remain uninvolved in this matter. "Indeed, if you ever come to a conclusion, let me know," Will said, his voice smooth as he set his glass down with a soft clink against the table. Evelyn let out a sigh, shaking her head as if she had already resolved that she wouldn't glean anything further from him this evening. "You're quite the enigma, Mr. Harrison. That's by design." She observed him for a moment longer, then ultimately released her gaze, pivoting back to Caleb and inquiring if he had sufficient food. The boy nodded, his eyes momentarily darting to Will before returning to his plate. Will ought to have stopped there. The meal was complete. The obligation, if it could even be termed that, which was settled. He could rise, extend his card to Evelyn, suggest she return if she ever sought employment, and that would conclude their interaction. Yet he chose not to. Before he had a chance to reconsider, he blurted out something inappropriate. "You mentioned before that individuals like you don't receive assistance." His voice was steady and deliberate, yet there was an undertone that caused Evelyn's shoulders to tense just a bit. "Is that something you genuinely believe? Or is that merely a narrative you construct to soften the blow of reality when it becomes undeniable?" Quietude, a gradual, nearly undetectable change. Then Evelyn let out a hearty laugh. Yet it lacked any trace of humor. It was a feeling devoid of warmth, a sense of weariness, a tone that echoed the weight of countless letdowns over time. "I don't say that to myself, Mr. Harrison. I have witnessed it." She let out a breath, a subtle shake of her head accompanying the tightening grip of her fingers around the napkin. "You believe I'm unaware of how others perceive me. A woman of color, beyond her youthful days, weary from the weight of life, yet steadfast in her dignity, refusing to be seen as an object of sympathy. You believe I'm unaware of the glances, the terminations, the manner in which society regards individuals like myself as if we are expendable." Her tone remained steady, yet it carried an undeniable weight. The significance of each word lingered in the air, sharp and exact, slicing through the meticulously crafted ambience of the restaurant with the precision of a knife. Will maintained her gaze, his expression a mystery, yet his fingers subtly curled against the table. "Individuals rarely extend their support to someone like me, Mr. Harrison, only if there's a benefit for them, and that's perfectly acceptable. I wouldn't anticipate anything different. However, I wouldn't want to share my beliefs on the matter. I can't afford to ignore the reality of the situation." Caleb shifted in his seat, a palpable discomfort washing over him, not due to any fault of his mother, but rather because her words rang true. Will ought to have remained untouched. He ought to have allowed it to fade away, to remain merely a fleeting instance, a truth that held no relevance for him. Yet, there was something in her tone, the unwavering conviction, the subdued, weary acceptance of it that penetrated his being like nothing else had in years. For there was a time long ago when he had shared that belief as well. "Not everyone perceives it that way," he remarked at last, his voice softer now, as if the dialogue had shifted from her to an unexpected focus on himself. Evelyn observed him intently. There was an inscrutable quality in her eyes. She let out a soft sigh, shaking her head, as though she had come to terms with the answer she had sought. Perhaps not. However, those who typically refrain often find they are not required to. Will experienced the force of that deep within his chest. Something frigid, something piercing, something perilously near to awareness. Her words were not directed at him. She was unaware of his past. He had once found himself in a shelter kitchen, much like Caleb, gazing at a plate of food offered by a woman who expected nothing in return. She was unaware. Yet, against all odds, she managed to do so. A lengthy, charged silence lingered between them. Caleb then nudged his plate aside, shattering the stillness that enveloped them. He confessed, almost with a hint of reluctance, that it was the finest meal he had ever experienced. Exhales softly, a smirk playing on the lips. It seems you've faced quite a challenging existence. The young lad exhaled sharply. I mean it. I feel the same way. Caleb rolled his eyes, yet a hint of levity danced across his features. It indicated that he had started to grasp Will's essence in a manner previously uncharted. Not in the manner of a wealthy individual. Not as an unreachable entity. Yet as a person who shared some similarities with him. Evelyn, nonetheless, continued to observe Will with keen attention. For just a fleeting moment, he believed she might pose the question once more. Inquire whether they have crossed paths previously. Inquire about the reason behind his gaze, as if he possessed knowledge beyond her understanding. Yet she chose not to. Instead, she composed herself, placing her napkin neatly beside her plate. I appreciate the dinner, Mr. Harrison. However, it is time for us to leave. Will might have allowed her to. One could have observed their departure and chosen not to reflect on it again. Yet, unexpectedly, he uttered words that had not been part of his original intention. It would be great for you to return. Evelyn blinked, momentarily disoriented. Beg your pardon? A job is essential for you. He uttered it nonchalantly, as though it weren't the most audacious act he'd committed in ages. I'm looking for skilled individuals to join my kitchen team. If the cookies are truly as delightful as you suggest, they might hold significant value. Caleb's eyes grew a touch wider. Evelyn, however, observed him intently, her expression a mystery. You're extending a job opportunity to me. An opportunity is being presented to you. Yet another extended silence. At last, Evelyn released a soft chuckle, her head shaking gently. And here I was under the impression that charity wasn't your thing, Mr. Harrison. I don't, Will replied calmly. I engage in commerce. I only bring on individuals who can stand on their own 2 feet. If you feel you can't maintain the pace, let's not prolong this any further. Caleb cast a quick look at his mother, anticipation hanging in the air. Evelyn let out a breath, a subtle shake of her head accompanying the shift in her gaze. I'll consider it. Will wore a sly grin. Go ahead and do that. With a single nod, she rose to her feet, gesturing for Caleb to come along. Without uttering a single word, they vanished into the darkness of the night. Will exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, his hand brushing thoughtfully over his jaw. He had just committed an act that could not be undone. He found himself uncertain of the reasons behind it. 7 days went by before she returned. Will was taken aback by her unexpected action. He reassured himself that it didn't matter. Extending a job offer to Evelyn Reed was merely a matter of practicality, assuming her baking skills matched Caleb's assertions. She was invaluable. That was the sole motivation behind his proposal. Yet he was aware that it was untrue. He had acted on the unsettling nature of her refusal to yield, to plead, to express gratitude in the manner that individuals of his kind anticipated from those of her standing. It brought back memories of his former self, the person he needed to become in order to endure. As he entered the kitchen at Harrison's prime, he spotted her there, hands clasped in front of her, wearing a simple, clean blouse and slacks that bore the slightest hints of wear. In that moment, he sensed a change within himself. She held his gaze, steadfast and resolute. You mentioned that you don't engage in charitable activities. So don't approach this in that manner. Will wore a sly grin. I prefer not to engage with individuals who require special considerations. I employ individuals who are capable of performing the task at hand. With his arms crossed, he gave a subtle nod in the direction of the counter. Reveal your talents to me. Indeed, she did. And it was absolutely fantastic. As the first batch of cookies emerged from the oven, the aroma wafted through the air, irresistibly pulling in half the kitchen staff. A sauce chef sampled the dish and almost let out a curse. Another inquired whether she had prior experience in fine dining. Evelyn smiled softly, shaking her head, yet there was a hint of caution in her expression, as if she were anticipating Will's response, seeking either his approval or dismissal. He took a bite, chewed deliberately, allowing the silence to linger just long enough for her to question whether he would uncover a flaw. Yet there was nothing. The cookie was flawlessly rich and balanced, evoking a sense of nostalgia for an unnamed memory. The flavor evoked a sense of familiarity. You begin on Monday, he said at last, flicking the remaining cookie back onto the plate. For the first time, Evelyn appeared taken aback. Is that all there is? That's all there is to it. She paused, scanning his expression for a hint of understanding. Yet Will had already shifted his focus, issuing commands to the staff as if this were just another day at the office. As he made his way back to his office, an unmistakable sensation washed over him. She was watching him. He pondered whether she had inadvertently re-entered his world, or if he had merely re-entered hers. As the months unfolded, a subtle transformation took place within the confines of Harrison's prime. It didn't happen in an instant, yet it was unmistakable. Evelyn found her groove in the kitchen, consistently demonstrating her skills until her presence was unquestioned. She transcended her role as merely the woman Will had employed. She evolved into a figure of respect among the staff. Every night, her pastries vanished without a trace. Frequent patrons requested them specifically. Caleb flourished. Initially, he had harbored doubts, observing Will with a cautious vigilance born from a lifetime of anticipating the retraction of commitments. Yet gradually he began to soften. He began arriving after school, initially to assist his mother, then to lend a hand around the restaurant, and ultimately because he found joy in it. He stayed in the kitchen, observing the chefs as they posed their inquiries. One evening, Will discovered him poised at a prep station, knife in hand, meticulously slicing herbs while the sous chef observed closely. Are you considering staying for a while? Will had inquired. Caleb merely shrugged. It's preferable to being out there. And Will had grasped precisely what he intended. Yet, despite the evolution of the restaurant and Caleb's transformation from a street kid with a box of cookies into something greater, Evelyn remained perplexed. She observed Will at times, her gaze focused and thoughtful, the understanding perpetually eluding her grasp. She sensed it. He was aware that she did. She simply hadn't connected the dots just yet. Until that fateful night she finally did. The evening stretched on, the restaurant alive with vibrant energy, the kitchen delivering plates with effortless precision. Evelyn lingered into the evening, perfecting a fresh batch of pastries for the following day. Will entered, anticipating that she would have already departed, but instead he discovered her by the counter, gazing at a plate of cookies as if she were lost in thought. Are you all right? He inquired. She took her time before responding. She turned to face him, her movements deliberate and measured. The memory has returned to me. Will became quiet. It took me a while, she continued, her voice soft yet unwavering, a newfound assurance weaving through her words that had previously been absent. Yet it lingers in my mind. She moved in a little closer, scanning his expression, and for the first time, he didn't attempt to shield it from her gaze. You were merely a child, she murmured. You lingered in my kitchen, silent and withdrawn, refusing to share even your name. Yet your face lingers in my memory. I recall the intensity of your hunger. Will exhaled slowly, a precise, deliberate breath. He might choose to deceive. He might shake his head, brush it off, and inform her that she was wrong. Yet he chose not to. Her perspective was indeed accurate. And in an instant, it became irrelevant that he had devoted years to denying the existence of that part of himself. In this moment, as he stood in the kitchen of the restaurant he had created, gazing at the woman who once offered him sustenance when he had nothing, he felt far from a millionaire. He was not a grand dominion. He was merely a boy, rescued by an unexpected hero. Indeed, he finally confessed, his voice gruffer than he had meant it to be. That was I. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Will, yet he shook his head, swallowing with difficulty. Refrain from expressing it. Her gaze became gentle. Your achievements fill me with pride. Will averted his gaze, fixating on the counter, his hands resting against the smooth, cool marble. He had dedicated years to escaping that past, to overcoming that hunger, to shedding that part of himself that had sought assistance. Yet, for the first time, he sensed that relying on it didn't equate to failure. Perhaps, just perhaps, it had led him to this very moment. For the first time in his life, that sensation no longer felt like a flaw. The inaugural evening of the restaurant's community dinner unfolded as a subtle triumph. Just a simple gathering, devoid of media attention, flashy cameras, or elaborate speeches. Only food to savor. Evelyn prepared a meal. Will observed, and Caleb served. The young lad navigated the space between tables, distributing plates with a warm smile in response to the gratitude expressed by the diners. He no longer resembled a child fighting for survival. He appeared as if he were meant to be there. Will leaned against the bar, observing Evelyn as she playfully ruffled her son's hair. He took in the sight of a woman and her child seated at a table, enjoying their meal without a care for where their next one might come from. Evelyn murmured beside him, "You're not as heartless as you want people to believe." With a sly grin, Will raised his glass. "Keep this to yourself. Could tarnish my standing." She let out a gentle chuckle, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's too late." He cast a quick look at her before shifting his gaze back to Caleb, observing the boy as he chatted with another child of similar age, a girl who appeared to be in dire need of nourishment. Caleb smiled broadly, and Will sensed a calmness envelop him, a tranquility that felt unwavering. "What is your true motivation behind this?" Evelyn inquired, observing him intently. Will exhaled, tilting his glass ever so slightly, observing the amber liquid dance in the soft glow of the dim light. "Because someone once extended that kindness to me." Come along and engage with us by clicking the like and subscribe buttons to share impactful narratives. Be sure to activate the notification bell to begin your day with deep insights and genuine compassion.